War with the British continued. Although the Native Americans were defeated, the war with the British continued. The war against Britain was not easy. In 1814, Britain won its war against France and then turned all its attention to the war with the United States. The first part of the British plan was to blockade the American coastline so that the United States could not receive supplies or help from any other countries. Then the British planned to attack the United States from three directions at once: from Canada in the north, from New Orleans in the south, and from the Atlantic Ocean in the east. The British attacked by land. The first part of the British plan was not successful. The attack on land from Canada was stopped by American troops in the northern part of the New York state. So the American troops were able to stop the British and keep them from entering through Canada. The British attack by sea. The British sailed into Chesapeake Bay in 1814 to start their attack from the Atlantic Ocean. The British ships put soldiers ashore about 30 miles from Washington, D.C. The American soldiers who tried to stop these British troops were poorly trained and were only volunteers. After the American soldiers were defeated, British troops marched into the capital. To get even for Americans burning government buildings in York, Canada, at the beginning of the war, the British troops set fire to the house the president lived in and other public buildings before they left the city. Afterwards, the president's house was black where it had been burned. It was an embarrassing reminder of the British action, so a coat of whitewash was used to cover the black charring. Since that day, the home where the president lives has been called the White House. The British troops were not stopped, so they went on to Baltimore, Maryland, where they attacked Fort McHenry, the main fort of Baltimore. All night, the British troops bombarded the fort, meaning they shot cannons and bombs at the fort. Our national anthem was written by Francis Scott Key, who spent the night watching the bombardment from a boat in the harbor. He was worried that British would win, take down the American flag, and make us colonies again. Each time a bomb's burst lit up the night and he could see the stars and stripes of the American flag, he knew we were still free. When dawn came and he saw the flag still there, he was so happy he wrote the poem that would later become our national anthem. Finally, the British troops gave up the attack and left Fort McHenry. The end of the War of 1812. The third target of the British was New Orleans, at the southern end of the Mississippi River. New Orleans was an important target for the British, for the same reason that President Jefferson had wanted to buy it from France. Colonel Andrew Jackson, his troops, and many Cherokee and Choctaw allies, who had just finished winning their battles with the Native American tribes of Creeks, arrived in New Orleans before the British. Andrew Jackson's soldiers included thousands of men from the frontier who hunted for a living and were expert shots. Joining them were hundreds of free African Americans from New Orleans who volunteered to help defend their city. On January 15, 1815, the British lined up in the open to fight the American army. The American army did something new in warfare. They dug trenches to protect themselves while they shot at the enemy. The British attacked and attacked, trying to get through the trenches. More than 2,000 British soldiers were killed that day, compared to only 7 American casualties. Colonel Andrew Jackson became famous as the hero of the Battle of New Orleans. By the winter of 1814, neither side seemed to be winning, and all of the British attacks had failed. Peace talks had started in Europe to end the war. On Christmas Eve in 1814, a peace agreement was signed in Europe. Because it had taken weeks for the news to get back to the United States, the Battle of New Orleans had actually taken place after the war was over. A second effect of the War of 1812. The U.S. became stronger. The United States had proven that even the great army and navy of Britain could not dominate the United States. The United States Army had shown that it could also defeat the Native American armies. Before the War of 1812, other countries often interfered with the business of the United States. As a result of the War of 1812, European countries began to treat the United States with more respect because the country had proved it could defend itself militarily. The country had also gotten stronger as manufacturing increased. Before the 1800s, Americans had imported many of the manufactured items they needed. During the War of 1812 and the years just before the war, it had been almost impossible to import things from other countries. As a result, companies in the United States began to manufacture the things they could no longer import. The increasing ability to manufacture products made the United States stronger than before. An important effect of the War of 1812 was that the United States had become stronger in two ways: increased military power and more manufacturing capability.